With such a big news week, let's get right into the show. With 3 mass shootings happening across the United States in the last week, national leaders are addressing many of the angles of the events. While President Obama spoke about ensuring these incidents do not become the norm, House Speaker Paul Ryan called for the need to address mental health issues. Patty Calhoun from Westward, it's even hard to try to put any sort of boundaries on all the different things that have happened this week. But starting with the bigger picture, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to start small and go to the bigger picture because it's amazing. Last week, when we normally would have been doing this show, we're just beginning to hear about the shootings in Colorado Springs, which we'll talk about more. But you just can't believe it's happening here again. And then of course, the bigger picture. It's happening everywhere, and there always are different twists. So no matter what fix you come up with, it wouldn't necessarily affect the next thing coming down. So yeah, mental health is great. I'm all for Congress saying, let's really do something about mental health. But we spent $30 million in Colorado last year in response to the theater shootings. That was going to help. And it certainly didn't stop what happened in Colorado Springs. We're going to hear about guns too, but we also hear even if there were more gun legislation, it wouldn't have stopped what happened in California because those guns were purchased legally. And then you go to France. I mean, I know everyone is fact-checking everyone else that Obama said, you know, it only happens here. Well, obviously, what happened in France was not happening in this country. It happens everywhere, and it's happening in all corners. And all you can do is try to come up with little fixes in every single area because nothing is going to be the one solution that'll stop it. You can't. What's going on in San Bernardino is beyond belief because it's workplace violence, it's fundamentalism. It's hard to really tell how that's going to shake out.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. I've already read some of your work this week that you've done for, I believe it's the Washington Post, and I know you've been called by a variety of media sources. You're one of the top Second Amendment experts in the country. But beyond just the Second Amendment, we have a lot of different angles here, whether it's abortion rights, gun control, we have terrorism issues, there's immigration stuff. It's all over the map. Starting again from the larger picture, what are some of your takeaways?
I think the mental health, strengthening that safety net is not a 100% solution for everything, but we know that it can make a big difference. Sensational crimes get media attention, but the situations where there's just a guy who's mentally ill kills 1 or 2 people, you know, that's never news beyond the town where it takes place. About 1/5 of the people in state prisons today for homicide have serious mental illness problems. When you go to the extreme end, even beyond homicide, up to the mass attacks, it's a much higher percentage than that. And we also know that there is, I hear it anecdotally from people who write to me, and you know, so many people go to a mental health facility and say, I know I'm going downhill, I need help, can you check me in? And they get told, no, you're not sick enough yet. And relatives call and say, this person's really deteriorating, can somebody help? And the answer is no, there's no help. But if they commit a crime, then we can put them in prison or jail. And so we've essentially we've reinstitutionalized people who should be getting help in mental hospitals, and now the Los Angeles County Jail is the largest mental health facility in this country right now in terms of how many people it has. And helping mentally ill people voluntarily, just giving them the treatment they're asking for, the most important crime reductive effect will be reducing crimes against them. They are victimized at a much higher rate. So that is something constructive we ought to do. And of all the things government spends money on, Quentin Tarantino movies, things like that, we ought to repurpose that to the legitimate thing of a much stronger safety net to help the mentally ill.
Eric Sondermann, political analyst. We're going to talk about the local political ramifications in our next round, but in this round, it seems to me that this is going to, it can't help but become a major issue for the presidential campaign, but it's going to be multi-pronged. And like I said, there's a lot of different issues with it, especially I think within a Republican primary. Do you think this grows arms and legs issue-wise politically?
Oh, of course it does. And yes, it is within a Republican primary, but it's also within a general. Democrats who have been afraid of the gun control issue ever since A lot of Democratic strategists regard it as having cost Al Gore the 2000 election, cost him in West Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, other states like that, any one of which, had he won, Florida would have been a moot point. So Democrats have shied away from this issue, but there's no more shying away from it. The Democrats are embracing this issue. David is right, but he's only half right. I mean, I guess what bothers me about this issue is whenever we have an incident like this, and obviously we've had more than one in this last week, everyone goes running to their corners. And gun control advocates, the left in this country, led by the president, immediately, before the bodies have even been dealt with, are singing gun control music. And gun rights activists are talking about mental health. And for some reason, color me whatever you want to color me, I don't regard those as mutually exclusive. I mean, I think you can have a serious conversation about both, and you can seriously deal with both. Now, guns are not going to vanish from this country. It's part of the American culture, not to mention part of our Constitution. But that doesn't mean they can't be regulated in a more substantial way than they are currently regulated. I think what bothers me, scares me the most right now, is to the extent that we're really developing a culture of fear, and how this is the narrative of this time in America and this time around the world. And it's a narrative for a lot of reasons, and we live in a very serious world. But as soon as we're done taping this show, I'm going to go out to a local K-8 school, do a workshop out there, and as I think about it, I am at much more risk driving from here to that school on the roads of Denver than I am sitting in that school for 90 minutes running a workshop. I think we have to have some perspective of, yes, these incidents happen way, way, way too often, but we don't need to live in the kind of fear that I think is promoted by the media and promoted by mass culture.
Mm-hmm. Multimedia journalist Lisa Kennedy joins us the first time. Thank you very much for being here. I know sometimes when we have a major event in the United States in history, it can unify the population. So even if people are the right or left on an issue, something like 9/11, Pearl Harbor, things like that, where people say, okay, we can compromise now. This doesn't seem to be one of those things. Even though it's a really big event, you see people, like Eric had said, going to their corners more fervently, not looking for a compromise, but maybe there's that independent voter out in America that wants to see some compromise. Out of all these big issues and different angles, what's your take?
Yeah, well, I think that that's such a great point, because just time-wise, it seems more and more frequently we don't have that moment. It's just like we don't even have that sliver of like pause before we're like back in the corners. And I think it's not just independent voters. I think that people that feel themselves to be either centrist or moderate on either side of the aisle find this sort of rush back to the ideological positions not only exhausting, cynical, and in weird ways sort of dangerous for what we stand for as a nation. And that's sort of from, to some degree, I feel like the outlier here, because it's like, you guys are all like really political, and I'm the culture person who sort of got, my back got up a little bit about the Quentin Tarantino thing. So, it's like,
You fit in just
it's
fine.
like, wait a minute. But I think that Patty, everyone's kind of, for me, the notion that we have to problem solve a lot of places at a lot. I think that's the struggle, right? This is a sidebar, which is Spike Lee's Chirac, right? And it's Chicago and Iraq, and it's about gun violence. And I can tell that because he's trying to straddle both the gun violence issue and the black-on-black crime issue, that he's going to get hammered from all people, including people from the quote-unquote black community, because no one wants to sort of say that there's something that looks like black-on-black crime, and I think that it's crime, but it's in a neighborhood that sees itself as a community, and therefore that's why you have a phrase like that. Mm-hmm. But what you said, I think, is just like nationally, we're missing some opportunity. If you ask me, I don't have like a disgrace thing later, but part of what's a disgrace is like how quickly we forget loss, mm-hmm. and how quickly we forget that these are like conversations that are about grief as well. And I don't know why, I'm afraid of flying. So that notion that like I'm much more likely to die on the road than I am in an airplane, I know that rationally, the same way I know rationally I'm gonna go to the movie theater, though I'm a little bit more anxious than I used to be. But at the same time, I think we have to take seriously how fear works for people, mm-hmm. what it is, and what it's and help them understand what it is, and not just sort of discount it as irrational, right. So much as going, there's things to be afraid of. And if we're not afraid here, then we're going to be really afraid down here when we don't know why this thing happened. It's like, do you know what I mean in a way? So
Makes sense.